It's January 6, 2023. A few days ago, Pele died. And I was asked to make a video telling that story telling the story of my 2 days with Pele. Because that is one of my favorite stories to tell. And the family wants to have this saved for posterity. So here it goes. I drove for Pele for 2 days when I lived in Rio. I was a driver for a car rental company, and on one occasion, I was asked to serve a business. I was hired because I was a bilingual driver, and they needed a bilingual driver for this driving gig. And when I got to the job, I learned that the client was Pele's business. Pele had a marketing firm that their job was to use his name in publicity stunts, and the name Pele was very valuable. His image was very valuable, so there was a whole business set up around using his image. And I worked for that business, and it was a great experience, and again, a story I tell frequently. The driving job was great fun for me because I never met a car I didn't want to drive. So I was driving a brand new luxury car, and that was immensely fun. So it was a very interesting day because there were a few. Of course, it was great to meet Pele because a big part of being Brazilian is soccer, and Pele is the face of soccer. He was the face of soccer. He is the one who made Brazil the país do futebol, the country of soccer. So, a few things drew my attention about working for Pele that day, those 2 days. One was that Pele was actually very humble. He would talk to anybody, talk to me a few times on equal footing. He treated everybody with respect. He was a humble man. The little story I say to illustrate that was one day there were two bags. I was the driver, so I reached down to pick up two suitcases that were going to go in my car. And Pele was beside me. He said, "No, I will take this one and you take that one." So it was clearly my job to carry both suitcases, but he offered to carry one, which he obviously didn't have to do. He was paying me to do that. So that struck me. It was a positive thing that day. He was a humble man. The house where I went to pick him up, to this day, I think that is the biggest, most luxurious house I've ever been in. On the mountains around Rio. It was an interesting place, that house. Another thing that drew my attention that day is that the workers around Pele were terribly incompetent. The people running the business were disorganized. They didn't know what they were doing. One thing they did well was they made Pele feel like a king. In fact, they called him king. I thought that was peculiar because Pele was known as the king of soccer, but people didn't call him king. I didn't call him king. I called him Mr. Edison, which was his name. But those co-workers called him king. It seemed like a big part of their job was to make him feel like a king. I understood that a few years later. I understood that a few years later when I read an interview by Pele's son, Edinho, who was also a professional soccer player and a good one in his own right. He was a first division player in Brazil. But he was not very happy with his father. He said that Pele was an absent father when Edinho was little, when Edinho was a child. And Pele was absent because of work. And the thing that Edinho kept hearing was that his father had to be absent because he was an important man. He had to be absent because the world needed him. But the son's theory, the son's idea was that the workers around Pele would tell him that kind of thing, that he was very important, that he needed to be absent in order for him to do the work that those people around him wanted him to do. In other words, the people around Pele who kept calling him king were in fact extracting all they could out of his image, were in fact using him to make them rich. So, Pele had around him a useless parcel of sycophants who would just tell him what he wanted to hear, and by doing that, they ended up using him. And that was the big lesson from that today, that even a man who was clearly a genius and who was humble ended up being lured away from his family because he was listening to bad friends. So the lesson is this: if our friends, our so-called friends, draw us away from family or away from God, from our obligations toward God, they really aren't friends. These are, like, those people weren't Pele's friends. They were people just using him, and they used him well. And in doing that, they ruined his relationship with his family, with his son. The son said at the end of the interview, Edinho said at the end of the interview, this was done 3 or 4 years ago, and Edinho said that he was taking care of his sick father, Pele, but he did that out of a sense of obligation, out of duty. And how much better would that have been for everyone involved if Edinho could take care of his father out of a sense of love and gratitude rather than mere duty. And I admire Edinho. I think he did some good work for his father, if nothing else because it was his duty, it was his obligation to take care of his father. But Pele, Edinho, the whole family would have been better off without those friends around him. So, treat your friends well. I don't know who's going to see this or when, but if there's a lesson in all of this, is choose friends that draw you closer to God and close to your family. Otherwise, they aren't really your friends. Thank you.